This week in Linux, we got new releases from EndeavourOS, PipeWire, and more. Linux Mint is in the news this week with the beta of their next major version, and new security vulnerability was found in OpenSSH, plus CentOS Linux has officially reached the end of the road. All of this and more on This Week in Linux, the weekly news show that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world. Now let's jump right into your source for Linux good news. The Linux Mint team have announced the beta release for their next major version of this very popular Ubuntu-based distribution, and that is Linux Mint 22. So this is a beta release, so we're only going to be talking about it for people who want to test it out or for those who are very impatient. And we're going to be covering the highlights, not the deep dive. We're going to wait for the full release to do the deep dive when that comes out, which will probably be around late July or sometime in August. So this is codename Wilma, and it is built on top of Ubuntu 24.04. This is normal for Linux Mint. They usually wait every 2 years to have a new LTS update before they update their main core base. But what's important about this one is that they are also including hardware enablement, or the HWE series updates. This is good because previously you'd have to use the Edge ISO or manually change the kernel or just do without. And that's been the case for many years, where you had to just do without. And it meant that if you did not have hardware support out of the box with the latest version, then you weren't going to be able to use that particular distro. In the case of Linux Mint and many other LTS-based distros, that you wouldn't be able to use it until the next full major version. And hopefully that would have hardware support for whatever your hardware is. Now, with the hardware enablement series of updates being added to the Linux Mint distribution, that means that there's possibility that every 6 months, there might be a change to add support in the case of someone not having support for their hardware. So that is awesome. Up next is the PipeWire by default. This is awesome because we're going to talk about PipeWire later on in the show, but PipeWire is a really cool multimedia server protocol system, and it's replacing Pulse Audio, and it's potentially replacing Jack as well. And I think that it is fantastic that Linux Mint is now doing it by default, because that means that basically most, if not all, distros at this point are now using PipeWire. So that is great to see. Also, they have a lot of improvements for their software manager. So the biggest one is probably the improved multi-threading, which is a very good performance improvement. And they've also made some changes to the Flatpaks. So for the verified Flatpaks, you will see the maintainer name of those Flatpaks. And for the unverified Flatpaks, they will be disabled. I mean, by default, you can re-enable them if you want to, but they are disabled by default. This is, depending on who you talk to, this is a good idea or not, because you're basically limiting access to different applications. But unverified means that it's not officially maintained by the developer. So it's community driven, or maybe even, who knows. So I get the point of why they wouldn't want to do it, but it's an interesting thing to do, because I think they're the first to do that. Now, they're the first to do it, except for Fedora has had some other stuff different. It's a different way of doing it. But anyway, they are going to have a label marking it as unverified if you do enable it. So it will notify you depending on which one it is. Also, they have updates to the Cinnamon desktop. So the Cinnamon 6.2 desktop we talked about in a previous episode is going to be in this release. And this is going to include Wayland support, experimental Wayland support. There's also going to be key binding support for spices, as well as the ability to search key bindings through the binding, which is very nice. So are you looking forward to this release of Linux Mint? Are you already a Linux Mint user? If so, what is your favorite part of the distro? And what are you most excited about this release? Let me know in the comments. The Qualys Threat Research Unit, or TRU, has identified a critical remote unauthenticated code execution, RCE, vulnerability in the OpenSSH server. So what does this mean? What is this threat? So Bharat Jogi, sorry if I butchered that, Senior Director of the Threat Research Unit at Qualys, says that the vulnerability, which is a signal handler race condition in OpenSSH server, or SSHD, allows unauthenticated remote code execution as root on glibc-based Linux systems. That represents a significant security risk. This race condition affects SSHD in its default configuration. So it's also named regression with the SSH in the middle, capitalized, of course. And the reason is because this was first found and patched back in 2006. But changes and updates that were made have brought the vulnerability back, and it was reintroduced in October of 2020. So it's a regression, which basically means that it was fixed, something happened, and it caused the issue to come back. And now it is fixed again. So it's important to note that it is fixed again. And all you need to do is basically update your system and patch it and that sort of thing, and you'll be good to go. There are other ways to work around it, but those aren't really good. We'll get to that in a second. But the potential impact of regression is pretty big. This could affect millions of instances, installation of malware, data theft, creation of backdoors. I mean, really anything, because it can even be a complete system takeover. So it's pretty bad. It's an 8.1 out of 10, but it is also challenging to exploit, and that's what makes it not a 10 out of 10. So the race condition involves complex exploitation steps and requires multiple attempts for success, potentially leading to memory corruption. Exploiting this flaw demands overcoming address space layout randomization, or ASLR. Now, this is pretty easy to mitigate. You just need to update your system. There is a workaround, like I mentioned. It's able to solve it without upgrading, but it opens a denial of service issue, so it's not really a good idea to do that. If you want to know information about that, I'll have links in the show notes. And if you might be affected, you can test for it, and there will be links in the show notes for that to show you how to test for it. Now, it's never a good thing to find vulnerabilities, but I'm glad to see it found and reported to the project to get it fixed. So good job to the Qualys team for finding and reporting it, and good job to OpenSSH team for already creating a patch. Another example of where open source shines. Canonical has launched a new service, Everything LTS, which expands their long-term support, or LTS, offerings to include distroless Docker images supported on RHEL, Ubuntu, VMware, or public cloud Kubernetes for over 12 years. This new service aims to offer critical CVE, or common vulnerability and exposure fixes, within 24 hours, and includes security maintenance for any open source app or dependencies, whether or not they are already packaged in Ubuntu, which is a big deal. That's a big deal. Now, these are custom and you wouldn't need to pay for them, but it is a very cool thing that they're doing. So this Everything LTS Docker images are distroless, so they're not based on a version of Ubuntu. And Canonical says in their announcement, the distroless container design paradigm describes containers that include only the files specifically required to run a single application. The goal is a container that is smaller and more difficult to exploit when vulnerabilities are discovered, because there are no surplus utilities or additional content inside the container that can aid an attacker. And also, the CEO of Canonical, Mark Shuttleworth, said, Everything LTS means CVE maintenance for your entire open source dependency tree, including open source that is not already packaged as deb in Ubuntu. So where can you use these distroless Docker images? Canonical says that Red Hat Enterprise Linux will be supported when containers are run on OpenShift or another certified Kubernetes distribution. On Ubuntu, containers will be supported on any of Canonical's Kubernetes offerings like Microkates or Charmed Kubernetes. VMware will be supported on Tanzu Kubernetes Grid or vSphere with Kubernetes, or on Ubuntu VMs on the vSphere clustered. And on public clouds, Canonical will support containers on Azure, AWS, Google, IBM, and Oracle public cloud Kubernetes offerings. It will also have support for .NET applications to be able to use these images. So this is clearly for enterprise and business types of things. And it's also a part of the Ubuntu Pro subscriptions, so there's no additional cost if you have Ubuntu Pro. And Canonical also says that VMware, RHEL, and public cloud hosts are supported at the same price as Ubuntu Pro hosts. So Canonical's Everything LTS service aims to provide a robust, secure, and compliant solution for enterprises needing long-term maintenance and support for their containerized applications, regardless of their complexity or the platforms they deploy on. So this is a very cool idea, and I'm very curious, what are your thoughts on this particular service? Is this something you would be able to use? And let me know in the comments below. PipeWire has announced the latest release of PipeWire with 1.2. Now, this is really cool because for those who are not familiar with PipeWire, it is a fantastic project that is effectively a replacement for Pulse Audio. Now, it's not actually made for that. It was originally intended to be called Pulse Video because it was kind of like the same idea, but for video. And then it just got much better and more powerful. And then eventually became a replacement for Pulse Audio, and even for some people, a replacement for Jack, because it can do a lot of cool stuff. And the fact that it is being added by default in so many distributions, if not all of them by now, is fantastic. I've been using it for quite a while, and I'm a big fan of it because it basically is a drop-in replacement. For most people, you are using PipeWire and you don't even know that, and that's good because it means that it is the drop-in replacement worked quite well. And if you don't know, then it worked well. So let's talk about the latest release and the highlights of PipeWire 1.2. So first up is explicit sync metadata and support. Now this is awesome because for people who are not familiar with explicit sync, this is very valuable for those who are using NVIDIA hardware and wanting to use Wayland, because previously Wayland NVIDIA wasn't a very good experience. Some people would argue that Wayland itself is not a good experience, but that's a different topic for a different day. But this is awesome that they've added it for PipeWire because it improves the support for those people who have that hardware and wanting to use Wayland, because Wayland is eventually going to be taking over. That's inevitable. But when that happens is a debatable thing. Now, it also added support for snap packaging. This is great for those who want to use PipeWire functionality inside of snaps. And this is for those who are not familiar, snaps are a packaging format that's made by Canonical. It's a sandboxed app format that's meant to be universal, so it's available to be used on Ubuntu and other distributions, although there's a little bit of debate about how universal it is. But there's also improvements that were made for the Flatpak support, which is another universal format. And this release adds support for security context, making it possible for a Flatpak to request a socket with specific properties from PipeWire to mount in the Flatpak. This is really good because it's adding a security benefit. Now, they've also added Snapcast Discover module to stream to Snapcast servers, which, by the way, have nothing to do with Ubuntu Snaps. It's called Snapcast. It also introduces improvements in how peers are linked and managed to reduce dropouts for connection stability. And they've also added metadata support for, mandatory metadata support when negotiating buffer parameters. And asynchronous processing was added to this, so nodes can choose to be scheduled asynchronously. The graph will not wait for the output of the node to continue processing, but it will use the output of the previous cycle instead. Now, this adds one cycle of latency, but it can also avoid having some nodes blocking the processing graph. So that's the reason why it's a pretty good thing to have. Now, I have been a fan of PipeWire since I first started using it back in 2021 with Fedora 34. It solves a lot of headaches for audio on Linux, and it just keeps getting better and better. If you are interested in learning more about PipeWire and why it was made or who it is for and all of that sort of thing, check out the interview we had with the founder of PipeWire, Wim Taemans, on Destination Linux 363. I'll have that linked in the show notes. This week in Linux, the CentOS saga came to an end. This means that CentOS will no longer get maintenance updates and security patches. We all knew this was coming, and the enterprise Linux landscape has dramatically changed over the course of the past few years since the initial announcement in 2020. Yet somehow, it seems that a surprising number of systems are still running CentOS 7. There's no way to know for sure exactly how many, but Landsweeper, a Belgian corporate network scanner vendor, says that its network scans revealed that 26% of scannable Linux boxes are running CentOS Linux 7 for some reason. Now, of course, it's because the migration process is a kind of a pain, but that's just true for any system, especially if you have like a massive number of instances. But there are options for migration. Of course there are. First of all, there's the most obvious one, which is Red Hat or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And this includes up to 4 years of extended lifecycle support for RHEL 7 once you convert. So there is that benefit if you do want to convert to RHEL 7. But there's also other options that you can do, such as SUSE. Now, SUSE has the system called the SUSE Liberty Linux, and they also have the SUSE Linux Liberty Lite. A lot to say. For a limited time, they're actually doing a discount. Until October 31st, SUSE is making available for a new promotional offer. So you can get SUSE Liberty Linux Lite for CentOS 7, which will essentially let you have a couple of years extra to kind of future-proof your process so you can still keep using CentOS 7, but also have some support. So I think it's 3 years, up to 3 years. So you would need to migrate at that point, but at least you'd have a little bit of a kind of a leeway or a grace period. Although it's been 4 years, so it is 3.5 years, I guess. Now, this is not a free subscription. If you want to get, like, for example, 100 subscriptions, that will cost you $25 per license, or $2,500. And if you have 1,000 subscriptions, that would be discounted to 20 per license, or $20,000. So depending on what situation you are in, you might want to check that out, or you might want to check out Alma Linux, because Alma Linux is an OS as an open source, community-driven Linux operating system that fills the gap left by the discontinuation of CentOS Linux. Now, Alma Linux is an enterprise Linux distro, and it's not a clone of Rail, although it started as a clone. It's now a binary compatible distribution that is binary compatible with Rail, and it's a pretty cool option. And for those who want that kind of thing, keep in mind you will not get any customer service from that thing unless you have one of the vendors for the Alma Linux, like Cloud Linux or something like that. Now, were you affected by the CentOS saga? Have you migrated yet? Are you part of the 26% that haven't migrated? Let me know in the comments. Oh, and by the way, I am working on a video for the CentOS saga for those who are not familiar with it, because, wow, there's a lot more to it than it seems on the surface. So subscribe to the channel to make sure you get notified about that video. 5 years ago, 4 former EndeavourOS moderators embarked on the ambitious journey of creating their own Linux distribution, and that is called EndeavourOS. Without any prior experience, by the way. Now, despite the challenges, they persevered with the help of their dedicated community, which has been instrumental in the distro's growth and success. And first, I want to say happy 5th anniversary to the EndeavourOS team. And a bit of history for those who are curious: EndeavourOS was born as the spiritual successor to EndeavourOS. EndeavourOS was an Arch-based distribution that had a goal of providing a single distro that could offer multiple desktop environments during installation. EndeavourOS was made by a team of 6 people, with 3 core developers and 3 other top contributors. And one of those people was named Michael Tennell, aka me. So I was on the team of EndeavourOS, and towards the end of EndeavourOS, I did kind of step away a little bit, but I saw that this change was happening, and because EndeavourOS was going away, which was the birth of why EndeavourOS came about. And I contacted the EndeavourOS team, so I contributed a little bit in the beginning stages to kind of guide them on where EndeavourOS kind of made some mistakes and missteps and that sort of things. And so far, all of my tests with EndeavourOS have been fantastic. I mean, I know people who have switched to it and love it, and there's a lot of great things to talk about with EndeavourOS. So it's good for me in the fact that I like this kind of distro. It's an Arch-based, but it's really close to Arch. It's not trying to customize it too much, but also it gives you a lot of options, being able to pick whatever desktop you want and that sort of thing. So it's something that I've liked for a long time. In fact, I was on the team of one of the things that did that. I think it's the only one that did that at the time. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I don't remember every detail. It's been a few years, but it's really cool to see EndeavourOS still going strong. Now, the highlights of this latest release, well, first of all, its code named is Endeavour. So if you're curious, this is Endeavour from the EndeavourOS team. There's not a huge ton of changes, but there are some big updates. Like, for example, KDE Plasma has been updated to 6.1. The kernel has been updated to 6.9.6. The graphics stack has been updated a lot, and many other things like that. But one of the big news is that ARM is back in production for EndeavourOS. In April 2024, the only ARM developer, left the team. And this caused, we talked about it previously in a previous episode of Twill, where they announced they were going to be stopping the ARM support. But that is back now because Brian says that, well, during this short hiatus, Pudge had some rest and a change of heart about leaving the ARM project. This hiatus also gave him this chance to look at some issues from a different angle, and he threw the entire ARM install he created with Strad Joker overboard and returned to the essence of EndeavourOS ARM once was. End quote. So the EndeavourOS ARM edition has support for the Raspberry Pi 4 and 5, the Odroid N2, the Pinebook Pro, and also has options for headless server installation. And they're also going to be having upcoming support for the Snapdragon X Elite, which is going to be very cool to see. That actually is being put into the kernel itself, as well as some more work being done on the EndeavourOS side. Also, they are still looking for people to contribute and help test for stuff like maybe having the Mac M1, M2, M3, that kind of series. Also, other brands like ThinkPad, ARM architecture stuff. And if you want to contribute with a team to create installs for those particular devices, I'll have links in the show notes where how you can do that. And also, EndeavourOS has come a long way in 5 years. So thanks to the dedication of the developers and the support of its community. And as they celebrate this milestone, I just once again want to say happy birthday to EndeavourOS, and here's to many more years to come. We have some updates for a couple of video editors to talk about. First, we're going to talk about Shotcut and then OpenShot. So Shotcut 24.06 has added an SVT AVI encoder, which is a CPU-based encoder. It's also added support for AVIF images, drop shadow video filter, a vibrance video filter, and plus many bug fixes and that sort of things. So the saturation filter, but less likely like to affect skin tones. That's really cool. That's why the vibrance filter was made. And there's a lot of other cool things with Shotcut. Shotcut is a very good video editor. And if you have not tried it out for yourself and you want to get into video editing, then check it out. Another option for you is OpenShot. With OpenShot 3.2.0, you're going to have a lot of improvements. They actually call this a game-changing release. So this has support for Blender 4.1 and has improved the Blender animations overall. They've also improved high DPI display support, as well as a new remove gap feature, which is awesome because I do video editing. If you don't know, I make videos on this channel. And this remove gap feature is a really good thing. And some of the video editors don't have it, and I think they all should, because what's the best thing to do is have markers that are identifying where you need to cut. So you have these little notes, and you write notes down if you mess up or something like that, and then you make it a marker or a guide or whatever they call it in whatever app. And then you go in and you chop out the stuff you want, and that will leave these gaps, because if you shrink it, you might have the markers not be right and that sort of thing. So it will leave these gaps on your timeline. And if having the ability to just click and say remove all gaps is such a nice thing, because removing one at a time, there could be 100 of those or more. And being able to just quickly get rid of it, such a nice feature. Just well done for that. They've also added compatibility for FFmpeg 7.0, or improved compatibility, and many other things. And also, OpenShot is looking for feedback on their new Cosmic Dust theme. So if you want to check it out, let them know about that. And if you are interested in any kind of video editor, there's many options on Linux, especially with the open source options. We have Kdenlive. We also have Shotcut and OpenShot. So we'll have links in the show notes for if you'd like to check out either one of these two in your workflow. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show and want to be kept up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world, then be sure to subscribe. And of course, remember to like that smash button. If you'd like to support the show and the Tux Digital Network, then consider becoming a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/membership, where you can get a bunch of cool perks like access to patron-only sections of our Discord server and much, much more. You can also support the shirt. You can support the show by ordering the shirt, Linux is Everywhere, or the t-shirt of This Week in Linux at tuxdigital.com/store. Plus, while you're there, check out all the cool stuff we have, like hats, mugs, hoodies, and just so much more at tuxdigital.com/store. I'll see you next time for another episode of your source for Linux news. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell. I hope you're doing swell. Be sure to ring that notification bell. And until next time, I bid you farewell.